Okay, so plein air painting here, and that's a really neat scene, by the way. Look at those rocks and those rock formations right by the beach. That would just be wonderful to paint. You know, really neat shapes and everything like that. The artist then sent me this plein air. Let's get that more in view. And overall, I think the plein air was well done. The sky looks a little slightly dark in value, but it might have been hazy too. So I don't want to say a whole lot about that. I know that the big question the artist had about this is what about when the ground plane looks lighter than the sky? Or I'm afraid that my ground plane is going to be lighter than my sky. Let's jump back to the photo here. And in situations, the ground plane can be lighter than your sky. So the angles of consequent values rule can be broken, is broken, and should be broken at times. You just have to know when and why and all that stuff. So as far as the painting, I I wouldn't be afraid of that, you know, if it does look lighter in the sky. I mean, one perfect example is look at the surf right here. Okay, big time lighter in the sky. It's almost always going to be lighter in the sky. If you're in an area where it snows, that's going to be lighter in the sky, you know, almost always. So looking at, you know, this photo of the painting with this scene, I do want to point out to the artist is look at the value difference though between here and the sky, and look at the value difference between here and the sky. Okay, it's a lot lighter. Sky's quite a bit lighter here. And if we go here, we can see that. So I didn't do this, but let's take this really quick and let's make that sky lighter. Check that out. Just like that. We don't do anything more than that. Okay. So see how that makes that whole thing make sense more. If the sky is clear. Now, going back to this, you know, you might have a situation like that if you do have a hazy, darker sky. That can happen in nature. But I'm just not seeing that, you know, in the photo. Okay. And how you tell is the artist might be like, well, how do I tell exactly what value the sky is? You don't have to tell exactly what value. Just compare the difference of value between here and here. That'll tell you right there. Sky's got to be lighter, you know. How much lighter? That could be left up to interpretation, but it's definitely got to be lighter if you're going to paint the scene as it's shown here in the photo. I'd also say to the artist, if you go back to this location, look at these beautiful shadows in these rocks here. If that were me, I'd be grabbing those shapes like crazy. I'd be blocking in those darks, you know, nice, strong, dark values. Hold on a second, you know, right in this area here. Big, strong, dark shapes. I get those bad boys in there real fast and make that the focal point. Okay, this is the reference for the next one. Beautiful, beautiful scene, by the way. Very nice. And one thing I want to say to the artist is that a lot of what makes this scene is the artist might think it's all about what's going on in here. Okay, look at those colors back there. Look at that light. That's incredible. But you know what's making those colors pop? You know what's making that light look the way it is? It's this stuff right here. It's all those darks there. And same with here. Okay, those darks, at least for me, when I saw this versus the painting, I was like, wow, gotta get those darks in there. I I used to make this mistake years ago. I would be walking along a path or driving along a road or something like that, and you'd be driving through some trees, and then there'd be a kind of an opening in the trees, and you get a glimpse of something in the distance, like a mountain or a barn or something like that. You're like, oh wow, that looks incredible. And so what you try to do is you try to get beyond the trees and get out there and look at the whole mountain, just the open view of it. And then you paint it and it doesn't look nearly as cool as when you first saw it. And you know why it looks so cool when you first saw it versus your painting? And I'm not saying that about this particular painting. I'm just saying that I made this mistake a lot of times where it looks so good when I first saw it, and now it doesn't look nearly as cool. Well, that's because I was looking at it through those trees, through that window of trees, and it kind of created this nice frame and it offset all that. And I needed those dark things in there in the foreground to make the background look interesting. Okay, so I just want a teachable moment, not particular so much that, yeah, that's what the artist needs to do, but I would definitely consider that for this painting. Okay, so this is the painting itself, and I think this might be slightly zoomed in, but not totally. Okay, but you can see here, overall, I think the artist is doing a good job, but see how when we don't have those neat foreground shapes, to me it loses something, it loses some impact. So I would highly encourage the artist to, as you progress with this, because I think this is kind of a work in progress, to get those foreground darks in there, get those shapes in there, because that's really gonna, I think, help make this painting really dynamic. All right. But the big question is with some of the colors and everything, okay? And I know the artist was asking, well, what about the reflections, okay? Because when we look at this reference photo, and this is what was kind of throwing the artist off, check this out too. See how these reflections look very light, you know, compared to what's going on here, all right? And we don't have any of these darks, hardly any of these darks are in the reflections. They're very, very light. That goes back to prove my point that reflections are almost always a more dulled down, muted version of what they're reflecting. If it's reflecting a dark, it's going to be a little bit lighter. If it's reflecting a light, it's going to be a little bit darker. Now these swans, you might say, well, they look exactly the same. You know, the reflections, yeah, pretty much, but I make them slightly darker. Check out the highlights up here on that vegetation. They're not really down here. Okay, it's not nearly as bright. All right. Also, the color would be slightly more neutralized. But what we have going on here, all right, this is really interesting. Check this out. This is so important. Is we have a shadow, a cast shadow on the water, and that cast shadow is actually cutting out a bleaching effect of the sun right here. See this very subtle thing we have going on there. That's basically, and I can feel it when I draw this line across, it's basically a cast shadow. At least that's what it seems to me anyway, going by, you know, I'm not at this location, but it seems to be what's going on. And so that cast shadow actually allows the reflections to sing a little bit more, because the reflections are a little more, you know, intense, but they're also a little darker in there too, versus what we have going on in here. Another thing that could be going on is you could have a slight ripple, a very slight breeze that comes through, and I can pretty much guarantee that's happening too, because let's zoom in a little bit. Look at this difference between right here and right here, all right? See how we got this lighter, hazier part, and how it makes these shadows, okay, the reflection of these shadows, which start here and then end here, or pick back up here, and in the middle they're canceled out. And I think what's probably happening is you have these little gusts of breeze that'll come by and just create little ripples in the water, not enough to really start reflecting the blue sky as it does in this spot here, but just a little bit to just slightly throw that reflection off a little bit and make it a little lighter in value, okay? And, oh, one more thing, let's zoom in on this, and check this out too. We have a dark green spot here and here and in here, but look at the reflection. The reflections are actually a lighter, warmer value, you know, color mass here. So that's something else to consider too, to be on the lookout when you're painting, all right, when you're preparing to paint. Same thing, you can see that exact same thing over in this area here. Darker green, more of a, you know, very muted yellow-green type thing going on there. Okay, so I think the artist is like, what the heck do I do about that? All right. This little hazy thing right here, I would completely ignore it. All right. I would go by the information that you have in here, in this zone, and in this zone down here, because this is a weird anomaly here, and I haven't seen that very often. All right. It might not even be a waste too. It could be pond scum, or something like that. But either way, it's definitely kind of a wonky thing that I would ignore. What I would do is I would go back to the painting and I would just paint this a maybe slightly lighter version of this overall, and just slightly more neutralized. So my reflections of my shadows here and here, they're going to be a little lighter in value. And also, it should be a little less intense in color than what it's reflecting. And I would do a lot of vertical strokes and then go back in with horizontal strokes here and there. That'll give you a nice impression of reflections. We've done a few paintings in the past with water reflections in them. I would highly encourage this artist. Actually, last year in October, I think we did one of an autumn scene with reflections. I would encourage the artist to go back and watch that, okay? Because we talked about handling reflections in that, and we have some other ones too with water that would help. But anyway, as far as other considerations on this painting, I went lighter and a little brighter with the foliage. Crappy Photoshop job, all right? But I think it gives more of a sense of light. This one, it's a little too neutralized. It's a little too dark. You need some of those darks in there, but you also need to go, I think, a hair lighter in value, just a hair, and a little more intense in color. And that's why going back, we always try to key in the sky. When you're dealing with a situation like this, we key in the sky last to the trees. Because if you start with your sky first and you paint that a dark, blue color, or a somewhat darker blue color, even if you think it's lighter, when you start putting the trees in and you have to go lighter in them, then it's like, oh my goodness, now my uprights are lighter in value than my sky. And if it's a storm sky, fine, but I don't think this is a storm sky. So then I went lighter with the sky. All right, see how that brightens the whole thing up? Now it feels more like sunlight to me, versus, we're not sure. And then I tried to go, this is crappy Photoshop job, but I tried to go once again a little duller, slightly darker in value with the reflections, all right? And that's what I would do. So we went from this to a highly digitized version, but once again, I love the texture and everything the artist has, but Photoshop, doesn't do that unless you go spend hours and hours on it. So we went from this to that. So that's my recommendations on that. Does anyone have any other thoughts or questions on this one before we move on? So this is a reference for our next painting, and looks like the colors are starting to turn there. Very beautiful scene. Got some power lines in there, which, you can't do anything about that, which is why it's so wonderful to be an artist. We can paint those things out. So mostly, somewhat side lit, kind of backlit scene. So let's check the painting out with this one. And this is a painting. First of all, I want to say I like how the artist took this, a lot of people might just do like a line here. And what's really cool is that the artist took this and stepped this down. Yeah, okay, no, I'm in the wrong layer, sorry. Step this down like this, and then like that, and like that, to give it more of a natural feeling of recession. All right, so great job on that. Kudos on that, okay? And, overall nice kind of composition with the eye going into here. Let's go back and see if it was like that. Yeah, the artist did a nice job of taking and interpreting, what's kind of just a dull tree line when you look at it, and making that more interesting. So great job on that. Kudos on that. As far as changes, the first thing I did is I slightly lightened and cooled the more distant landmass. Okay, it's fairly warm, and I think what can happen, and I totally have been there, is that we can look at a scene like this and you start to look at all these nice warms and things like that, these subtle fall colors and everything, and it can really kind of trick us in a way. All right, what you have to do is you have to once again look at the overall landmass. And when I look at this overall land mass and I compare it to what's going on here, this is cooler and lighter. One trick I like to do with photos, all right, let me show you guys what I've been doing this more and more lately, is, let's see if this will work, is do something like this, all right? I know that it kind of bugs the eyes a little bit, but what that does is that helps me to focus on the essentials. And in fact, let's do another filter here. Let's go in and render pixelate. Okay, that's a little much there, I think, but not too much. There, let's go with that, okay? Now that's gonna freak your eyes out somewhat, and it's gonna look blurry, but what doing this, this is kind of the equivalent of squinting when you're out there. Basically, what am I seeing here? I'm seeing essentially a blue, dark blue mass. It gets a little more red in here, maybe a hint of green, but it definitely gets lighter and bluer in there. You have these little tiny tan pixels there. I'm just gonna basically kind of ignore those, or if I do put them in, look how neutralized they are, okay? And my big thing is I'm going to compare this value in color mass to what I have going on here. Notice how much darker and greener this is, more yellow-green, than what we have going on there. So that's going to be my number one consideration when I'm painting. Nothing else is going to interfere with this. If I showed you this without any of that detail, you'd know exactly what it is. You're like, okay, we got a river, we got some hills back there, we have some trees in the foreground, we got some kind of vegetation growing up, maybe it looks like corn, and we have some grass in the foreground, okay? And what's telling us that? Well, value mass sky, lightest value mass here, next darkest value mass is here, our greenest, yellowest colors are in the foreground here, as well as right here. We have this lighter, or this darker, tanner, neutralized color there. We have our darkest darks right here. Darkest darks here. We got a couple darkest darks in there too, but mainly I'm probably going to ignore those because those might just end up becoming a distraction. But I'm just going to have this darkest dark here. Notice this, all right? This is not much lighter than what's going on here. And it's definitely darker than what we have going on the ground plane, and definitely darker than the sky. Want evidence of that? Let's take this, and hopefully I'm not killing your eyes here, but let's cut that out, and let's move this down in here, okay? With the exception of the accents in the grass, that's definitely darker. Let's move that up into the sky, Look way darker. The highlights on those trees, look how much darker they are than the sky. Super dark comparison, okay? So I'm going to block this in like this, and I'm not going to let anything destroy this. I'm not going to let any pretty little fall colors back in those hills take away from the fact that overall this area has got to be blue, somewhat blue, okay? It's definitely got to be bluer and cooler than what we have going on here. Nothing is going to get in the way of that, all right? So that's something, let's see if I can Command Z back to there, okay? But see, when we do this, and we look at the scene like this, and this is when you're outdoors painting, you want to squint a lot to simplify to do that exact thing I just did there in Photoshop, all right? When I look at this, and you start looking just in this area, well, my goodness, let's zoom in on that. Let's look in here. Okay, well, man, we got, is this kind of green in here? We have this kind of, orangish color going on here. I think I got to go bigger with this. This orangish color. We got these kind of orangish colors here. And what the heck is this up here compared to, you start just totally zeroing in on that. And then to separate all that, you're going to have every color of the rainbow in this hill before you're done. And it's not going to look right as compared to everything else. All right. So let's jump back to the painting. Okay. So with the painting, let's go back to the original. We got pretty warm there with that background. I'm going to lighten that. I'm going to lighten it. I'm going to make it more blue. Don't know if it could be better than that, but once again, we're just dealing with quick Photoshop adjustments for illustration. And next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lighten that sky a little bit. I think the sky got, you know, it's a little dark compared with that hill. Maybe go a little lighter with that sky, because right now it just feels like, you know, is it overcast? Is it not overcast? I'm not sure. Okay. And then in the foreground, actually, this is a drawing issue, but I didn't like how this kind of cuts over like that. So what I did is I wanted to make this feel like it's definitely angling more away from me. So I took this down like that to give it more of a feeling of recession. All right. And I went a little lighter with that stuff on the corn. I don't know if I like that or not. That might have been too light, but I did do that. And yeah, I think that's it. I think I just went lighter with that corn there. But I'm going to try to darken that a little bit, because I think that was a little too much. I think a value like that is probably a little bit better. Okay. So what we did is we went from, let me shut these off, from this to that. Not big changes, but slight changes, okay? Another thing is I would desaturate this yellow right back in here. That's almost the same saturation as what we have going on up here, okay? And how you desaturate that, I'd probably actually go more toward yellow ochre, and maybe even adding some bits of alizarin and ultramarine to it to neutralize it, or maybe alizarin and Viridian. That might work, that might not. I mean, I'm just shooting from the hip here, but I think that yellow back there is a little too intense. Once again, you got to go back to here. Where'd the photo go? We're jumping all over the place now. Sorry, somehow that got at the end. You know, when you look back in here, yeah, that looks really intense, but you always have to compare that with what's going on here. How intense is it compared to our foreground, okay? It can get fairly intense, but if you get too crazy and too much with it, it's going to not look like it's far away, okay? In fact, one thing, check this out, I love about these scenes like this. Look at this beautiful blue right in here. I would roll with that some more and definitely, you know, show more of that blue in here and make this blue, at least back here, the dominant thing. And then these parts of the trees that the sunlight's hitting, make that kind of subordinate, give it a little more form and structure back there. I would take the blues that are in the trees here, the dark blues, make those a little more dominant in shape, and then just, you know, put the highlights in there on top of that. So anyway, that's my thoughts on this one. So anyway, thank you very much for those of you who were able to attend. I know most people are watching this on the recording later, which is awesome. And you know, if anyone who's watching on the recording later, if you're not certain about what I said, if you have a question, something's confusing, or even a rebuttal or something like that, feel free to email it to me. You know, I'll be happy to do my best to answer that. Thank you very much, everyone. Keep up the great work, and we'll see you all again.